Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. Each week we talk about heart rate variability and how it can be used to improve your overall health and wellness. Please consider the information in this podcast for your informational use and not medical advice. Please see your medical provider to apply any of the strategies outlined in this episode. Heart Rate Variability Podcast is a production of Optimal LLC and Optimal HRV. Check us out at optimalhrv.com. Please enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody, to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. I am Matt Bennett, here with a fellow HRV mental health nerd. I'm so excited for this conversation with Rohan Dixit. Rohan, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to dive into your work and your journey with heart rate variability. But before I start to nerd out with you, I'd love just kind of a brief introduction about your work. I got your website up. I cannot wait to dive into it. But just a little bit of a brief introduction so our audience knows who you are.
Yeah, first of all, happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity, Matt. It's great to meet you, and would love to share more. Yeah, I mean, myself in a nutshell, I was a neuroscientist for a while, studying mindfulness and meditation and its effect on mental health. Got into HRV, started creating prototypes and wearables and devices, and then founded Lief, which is a wearable device company for mental health.
Awesome. So what got you, as you were going through this in neuroscience, which is where sort of, my work with trauma in the mental health space is kind of where I started to get really excited, because I felt like, when I say psychology, I graduated with my master's in 2000. We weren't talking much about the brain, much less like the autonomic nervous system. So I would love to hear your journey from kind of the neuroscience, which I know heart rate variability is connected to that, to just what kind of got you really interested in HRV.
Yeah, it's a similar thing, I think, to the psychology field, where neuroscientists, I think, had a little bit of had blinders on to some degree. And you focus on what you know, right? And so people assume that everything, about the human mind was in the brain. And that just turns out to not be the case. I mean, you know this now from your work with HRV and the autonomic nervous system. The body has a distributed nervous system, and that has a huge impact on emotional state. Self-regulation, so many things that are important to psychological health and mental well-being, and many other things. I stumbled into it actually because, the reason I became a neuroscientist in the first place, I had struggled with anxiety and depression myself, found a book about meditation from my mom lying around the house, and that made a huge impact on me. And so, I had, since the age of 14 or 15, been trying to create a meditation machine. I assumed it could help me, learn meditation better. I thought it could help other people. I sort of felt like I was on a mission, and so that's why I got into neuroscience, studied, functional and structural networks in the brain that change during meditation and during practice of repeated attentional training. And what I ended up finding as I started to want to take stuff from the lab and into the real world was that you really need more than just knowledge to be able to effectively learn some of these techniques. You need kind of tools in some cases. You need processes, you need support, right? And so that was a big gap for me between knowing intellectually, oh, meditation is good for me, I should probably do it more, to, well, how do I really do it well? Am I doing it right? How do I stay consistent? All of those things. And so I started trying to create devices around it that could help me, just weird prototypes, machines, gadgets. And so that's how I eventually, I started with the brain, looking at EEG.
Yeah.
The problem with that, as you know, and some of your audience may know, is that brain signals measured from the skull are really, really weak.
Yes.
So if you're blinking, if you're, talking, if you're moving around at all, you can't see what's happening in the brain. Right. And so it's almost a useless tool to walk around. And that's when I started looking at other biosignals, and that's when I saw HRV, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, really interesting. It's connected to the brain, and you could measure it while you go about your daily life.
Awesome. So I got to ask you, because one of the things that I find, especially as folks in the trauma world, that I spend a lot of my time in trauma-informed care, those sort of things. I think we always look, and I'm guilty of this as well, to simplify the complexity. And so whether it's like polyvagal theory, which heart rate variability is a huge piece of, whether it's, neuro functioning, sometimes I think we lose we sometimes stray off course because we fall in love with our analogies. So I would love, as somebody who holds expertise in neuroscience and heart rate variability, I would love to pick your brain a little bit about the connection between the brain and the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems, because I still, after reading hundreds of books about the brain, trying to catch up with the autonomic nervous system, just, I guess, not sexy. So there's not that many parasympathetic books out there at this point. But, we talk about the down regulation of the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. How do you see this all as an integrated whole? When you take your expertise of what's in our skulls and really look at it below the brainstem?
Yeah, there's a difference between the map and the territory.
I love that. I love that. Boy. Yeah.
And it's so true, right? I think, any model is going to simplify things. And,
yes.
I think the deeper and this is my personal opinion, I think other people might share this, but I think the deeper you try to double click and kind of go focus in on what's actually happening at a mechanistic level, not only in the brain, but also the autonomic nervous system, the more you realize we just don't know. And I think that's
says a neuroscientist, which makes me feel better.
This is the paradox of information, right? It's like we do know a lot. There's thousands of papers out there, right? So there's all kinds of work that's been done, and including some interesting stuff that's been done in the last couple of years coming out of Stanford and other places where you're looking at functional brain networks and measuring autonomic nervous system activity and actually seeing interplays between the two, right?
Yeah.
We know these two systems are deeply interconnected. We know our mind broadly is really composed of not only just what's happening in our brain, but also the way that our body, our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, this distributed nervous system in the
yes.
physicality of the system itself is driving part of that. And so I think these two things are interplaying. The ways and the mechanisms by which it does that are still broadly unknown. You'll look at things like vagal stimulators, which people will typically kind of you'll shock parts of the vagus nerve that are exposed that you can actually get access to, right? We do know that the heart and the brain are very intimately interconnected through this long nerve, the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the human body. Yeah. All kinds of interesting stuff there. But if you look at even a cutting edge vagal stimulator, I don't know that people would tell you they really understand why the frequencies that they're using are having an effect, either excitatory or inhibitory on those nerves, and what are the actual mechanisms. I think we're still guessing, we're still learning. So this is a kind of a little bit of take what you can that's useful and that you can actually apply, and just know that we don't have the full understanding yet of why some of this stuff is working.
Yeah. So when you talk to people like in the mental health space about stress, because I think it's such a fascinating thing, because again, focusing on mostly the brain for the first, because I studied it outside the academic environment, but just reading every book that I could, and occasionally going to peer review journal articles, which just I struggle with that language a little bit more. So just reading all the great books that have been coming out really since the 90s on this, almost like stress is one thing in the brain and then one thing in the autonomic nervous system, yet they're interrelated. So I just think it's a fascinating time where I see a lot of people, if you cut off the head, they can talk about it from what's going on in the skull. Then you've got polyvagal folks in my world too, some of which forget we have a brain. You can't forget we have the brain. You don't have to explain everything, I guess, below the neck. So I hope we're entering a time of integration, but I think everything gets so complex that I'm not sure when we're going to really hit a full understanding.
I don't know the answer to that either, but I do know that there's a lot of smart researchers
Yeah.
working on, we're lucky to be connected to some of them. I know some of them from my previous, life as a scientist, and it's exciting to learn how our mind works and how, we become human beings. And I think there's a lot of researchers out there, really smart people that are interested in this too, and are now able to collect a lot of the data, right? Because half the problem is you're not looking. One of the first labs that I worked in right out of college was Mike Rish's lab at Stanford. And he is one of the early people who published research on what's called the resting state, or the default mode of the human brain. It's this state of the human mind where you're not extrinsically focused on a task. Typically, when you put someone in a brain scanner and you're paying thousands of dollars for it, you're having to do math problems, you're having them read, you're trying to figure out how the brain, physically is creating these cognitions and all the stuff that we typically associate with humans and what's unique about humans. But it turns out that, in between the tasks, there was this brain network that was arising when there was nothing being done to the user. And this default mode only really was noticed when you looked at something that, theoretically shouldn't have any interesting information in it at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's been happening with HRV, and it's now starting to change, where people are recognizing there's something interesting going on here. And, that in and of itself is going to drive, I think, a lot of understanding over the next 5-10 years. And we already know a ton, not just mechanistically, but certainly of the effects of HRV and HRV biofeedback on, for example, different mental health conditions.
Yes.
And that'll continue to be the case.
Awesome. So we kind of left your story off of, you found a book on meditation. It spoke to you in a way that I think some of this stuff has spoken to me is, somebody's got to be doing something about this. So I'd love to pick up on your journey there of looking for, I think the word you used was meditation machine sort of thing, this cross of psychology, technology. So I know you got some really cool stuff on your website. So love to talk a little bit more about that from that place of looking at, there could be a really benefit to a lot of people, including yourself, from having, sort of merging technology and this evolving science in psychology, just sort of how your story has evolved since that spark led to some innovation.
Yeah. So, on our website today, if you go to the Lief website, it doesn't say the word meditation anywhere. We don't talk in those terms. We're looking at the mechanisms, and we're creating clinical grade tools for people, to actually utilize. And, but where it started was, this idea of a meditation machine when I was 15. So just kind of like digging into some of these books and noticing as I started to practice some of these techniques that it made me feel better, and that's a huge deal, especially, when you don't have other tools out there. And this is probably a similar situation to many people. And you'll know this from working in the mental health space. But most people that need help, that might have anxiety or depression or PTSD or struggling with addiction, most people don't get help.
Yeah.
Most people don't get help, right? And so that was my experience too. And so this became a real lifeline for me and really made a big impact. And when I went to college, my thesis there was around using network science to try to understand when someone's meditating and you're measuring the electrical activity of their brain, are these networks that are being formed structurally different from the normal state of human cognition? What's actually going on? And that just continued for years. But I think, I'll just mention this briefly and then kind of, let it go. But I think there's a lot of value in applying things to your life versus intellectually understanding them. And so even though I was in the lab and I knew a lot, I'd probably read, hundreds of books at that point about, the mind and neuroscience and meditation and mindfulness and all kinds of, books going way, way back in time to hundreds of years old books, sometimes thousands.
Yeah.
And all of that was great, but it's like, well, if you're not practicing this stuff, it's not really going to help you. It's just sort of this like knowledge you have, right? So
Yeah.
that was to me the big turning point. And I quit the lab at one point. I bought a one-way ticket to the Himalayan mountains, and I went to go find these monks that I've been reading about.
Wow.
Studying.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so I spent a year kind of like traveling around with a bunch of brainwave equipment and heartbeat sensors in my backpack, finding these monks, living with them, going from monastery to monastery. And that was a really incredible transformative experience. It allowed me to collect data, which was very helpful for,
Yes.
starting Lief, and it also really just exposed me to the practice of what it looks like to make these attentional training procedures and processes like very real and actually make an impact in your life. And so that was very impactful too.
Amazing. So, I wish I could have went on you with that journey. That would have been that had to be amazing to be in the Himalayas while you're thinking deeply about meditation. So as you looked at this, plenty of research out there over the years, obviously, that different sort of meditations improve a range of functioning, health, intelligence, emotional regulation, mental health, really, really great tool. So looking at bringing in technology, and obviously being associated at, Stanford, had to be a really probably ideal place to be to think about this. But where do you think from the traditional practices, how do you think technology, kind of maybe improves or gives more insight to, but building on technology of studying some really ancient processes that have been around, some for thousands of years, and then really applying and creating new technology? How do you think that supplements these traditional practices?
One of the people I consider a mentor is Dick Gevirtz,
Yes.
Dr. Gevirtz, and
friend of the show.
He's friend of the show. Okay, great. I mean, he's amazing, and
yes,
he's so helpful to me and over years, and it's really helped guide me. And I think one of the things he always says, which I kind of am tickled by it and tell people, is HRV biofeedback is a brand new technology that's 3,000 years old.
I love it.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that, and sometimes people will ask me, do I need to download an app? Do I need to use a device? Do I need to do any of this stuff to learn meditation? And my answer is always no, you don't.
Yeah.
These things are aids, right? Yeah. What you're doing is you're trying to tune in and listen to what's happening in your body. And what, the value of the tool is that, a teacher as well as a device in this case, which is what I'm working on, but just broadly, any help in this process allows you to kind of like grab a little thread of, let me explore a little more. Let me kind of listen a little closer. And then I'm starting to feel my heartbeat. And then I'm starting to kind of notice my breathing. And then I'm slowly over time, I'm learning this ability to say, one, let me have mindfulness of how my physiology affects my mental state.
Yeah.
That's a huge insight. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time in many cases to like really internalize that. And then two, how can I take that knowledge that my mind does affect my body and vice versa, and actually start to shift my mental state through self-regulation practices like mindfulness, like meditation, like biofeedback, right? And so I think the value of these tools, in particular biofeedback, is that some of this stuff is harder to learn, without an aid. And so it can speed up the process of learning. It can make it a little more effective maybe. And it can also, for the way that we use it with, in some cases, clinical populations, it allows a patient and a doctor to sort of gauge progress as well, right? Because you can very clearly measure, hey, if I tell you to go meditate for 10 minutes a day, did you do it? Did you not? Did you try? Was it good? Like, I don't know, if I tell you to do 10 minutes of biofeedback every day, I can measure your HRV increasing every single time. And I can see, is it being effective or not? So,
yeah, it's funny. We have a dashboard, clinician's dashboard for our app. And while we're proud of all the technology that goes behind it, pretty much the best result that clinicians are doing is it's an accountability tool. Like, I can see whether or not you're practicing. So all this science that we're really excited to bring to clinicians, it's like, Nope, I can see whether or not they practice is the pretty much the number one piece of feedback that we get, which I find is just absolutely hilarious.
It's so true. And there may be stuff in the future that ends up being, more helpful and over time. For example, diagnostics can probably be pulled out of HRV, with more sophisticated processing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff there. But at the end of the day, if you talk to anybody in healthcare, and certainly in behavior change, the hardest thing to do is to get anyone to do anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah.
So, one of the things that I've sort of taken this interesting journey with Optimal of, when I started thinking about this, 5-6 years ago now, I assumed that when we hit, 2023, there would be a great $30 device that would be simple, because one of my focuses, our audience knows, is, I want this to be available to everybody. Like I want to go homeless shelters, child welfare, that's where a lot of my passion really lies. So I just assumed that, hey, if I made this app, somebody would, it'd be a $30 Fitbit at some point. And here we are in 2023 with, I love the, I call it HRV Twitter, where the Apple Watch is like a trigger for folks that will go nuts if you say you measure your HRV on an Apple Watch. But, you got all this sort of pieces out here where, the device is still sort of an issue with this because you need that level. So I would love to hear your journey of creating and bringing a device to the marketplace, because I imagine just because I still don't have that $30 reader. We got one on the market for less than $50, which we're proud of, and hopefully that price point goes down even over time. But what was your journey to get accurate readings and get a product to the market?
Yeah, gosh,
I believe FDA approval. Did I see on your website?
We have an FDA Class 2 version of the device as well.
Yes,
yeah, it's called RX. Yeah.
So congratulations on that, because I Googled that and that didn't look like fun either.
I think FDA in general, they're trying to make sure that there's safe, effective tools out there. Yes, so absolutely. It's a lot of work, I think, but also, I kind of am glad that these processes exist, as I was going through it for the first time, really, with a bunch of really smart advisors who have done it before. But yeah, I mean, the question of cost, I think, is a huge one, right? And I think we're just too early. That's probably what's going on here. Even though it feels dramatically different from maybe 5 or 10 years ago when no one was talking about HRV.
Right.
I think it's much more in the zeitgeist now. But to me, what I've always hoped to do ever since I was, 15 is, gosh, these tools have helped me a ton. And I would love it if other people who are in a dark place or who need help are able to access this stuff when they need it. Yeah. And that means, making it accessible. And one of the things we've done, we have it with our FDA device, and, it's not cheap to make a medical device. I think as we start to scale it, those costs will come down. Yeah. And we're just not quite there yet, unfortunately. But one of the things we have been able to do, because it is an FDA device, is to be able to get it covered by a lot of people's insurance, and that can bring the cost down a lot.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's going to take all types of people and approaches to be working on this and finding ways it can be helpful. And eventually, these tools will hopefully become much more available to people, as also, by the way, we prove the benefit out to people. That's a key part of it as well.
Absolutely. And bringing that to market, I wonder, here you are. And what I love, and I think we kind of started the podcast out of this, is pretty quickly, like when we were talking about, is the amygdala and sympathetic, they're connected. How are they connected? How do they work? All these things is, I think one of the exciting things is we push up against the wall of knowledge and the limits of our knowledge pretty quickly, even though I love the, you don't have to drink while you do it, but the game of, Googling heart rate variability in anything and seeing if you get a journal article. I was joking. I was like, I wanted to know what's the perfect temperature to take a bath for your heart rate variability. Guess what? There's a meta study done on it already. So on one hand, like there's been a dozen studies on bath temperature and HRV, yet, you still kind of push up against these, walls, which to me is exciting. So, I wonder as you kind of push those barriers to bring, these accurate tools to the market, just kind of lessons, insights, epiphanies that you've had along the way, because I think from my perspective is, we need to measure heart rate variability. And then, 5 or 6 years later, it's like, I see 20 different things. I went on the app tomorrow and, ensuring that those are accurate, those are based in science, all those things. So I'd love to just see, like, as you did that, big lifting for the rest of us to bring your product to the market. Just sort of what have you learned from that experience along the way?
Thanks for the question. And also it's very comforting to know that someone else plays that HRV game too.
Well, trust me, after writing 2 books on it, it's really useful. It's like, I had an idea. Yep, there's an article I could reference. So
it's incredible actually that there's such a wealth of knowledge that wasn't there, a decade or two ago. Gosh, lessons learned. I mean, so many. We had initially started with trying to build on the Apple Watch, and just it's tougher with a sensor like that to get good quality data. And what I was really interested in, more so than measuring HRV, was doing biofeedback on it. Yes. I think that's a huge thing that I think is a learning that people may not be familiar with yet, even those who know about HRV and even use it in their daily life, So biofeedback is just an incredible skill. It's almost superpower where you can learn conscious control over a previously unconscious body signal by giving it back to yourself in real time with accuracy, right? So fingertip temperature, there's a million different things that you can learn conscious control over. The thing with, that I feel like we have pushed forward a little bit at Lief, and this is, in part due because I just wanted this myself, was, well, okay, I really want to be in tune with how I'm feeling all the time throughout the day. And I'm not necessarily stressed when I'm sitting on my meditation cushion in the morning doing my practice. So how do I take it into the world when I'm getting screamed at and, in a bank somewhere, or, I'm waiting in a line in the grocery store and it's taking forever. Like, how do you get into the world that is actually the points where you are feeling, challenge and conflict, and learn how to mediate those situations. And so I think, that was sort of why we chose to use an EKG with Lief. It's like, okay, well, if you're walking around all day, it's going to be hard to measure an accurate signal. Particularly with HRV, if you're ambulatory, it's just a tough problem. So let's use an EKG. And then the second thing we tried to figure out was, well, how can you communicate to somebody in real time what their HRV is? That's what biofeedback is all about. It's like understanding what's going on inside of you in real time, quantitatively. Well, how do you do that when we're talking about mental health, let's say, or anxiety, where I'm like in a tough meeting and I can't just pull my phone out and say, hey, everybody, just stop. Look at my phone. I need to do a biofeedback exercise, right? So for those reasons, we figured out, like, well, if you have an EKG and you build these vibration haptic motors into it, cheapo cell phone motors, and learn how to basically turn heart rate and heart rate variability into this pattern, you can actually teach people to interpret that pattern over time and learn how to control it, just like they were looking at a number of HRV, or a visual signal of a heart rate, or an auditory signal, which is how I've done for many decades. So those 2 insights allowed us to build this real-time system that can jump in when you need it. And then you can kind of train with it, and you can move the thresholds up and down. And so those are just newer concepts that I haven't seen elsewhere, but have been really helpful to start, making this more real for us.
That's awesome. So when because one of the questions I often get is, focusing more on that, put on a device, take a reading, do a biofeedback, piece of that is, I think one of the questions that I kind of struggle is, well, like, 24/7 monitoring, what is sort of, if you're tracking Apple Watch like that or whatever, like, have you learned anything? Because one of the things I really struggle, you go for a run, let's say you're training for a marathon, it's going to wreak havoc a lot of times to your HRV, yet if you're not going to hurt yourself and push yourself beyond limits, could be a very healthy thing for you overall. And I just, as you look at the data that you start to collect, and I'm not exactly sure how you collect it, what are maybe some insights you're getting from 24/7, or your clients are getting, customers are getting from 24/7 monitoring that, might get missed a little bit when you're just like taking a morning reading or something along those lines?
I think HRV is, especially when you're measuring it, with a real fine-grained tool, I think people will notice as you go about your day that little micro stressors can have a big impact on HRV.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that people miss when they're only taking a single reading a day, which, by the way, is very helpful.
Yeah.
And there's a whole kind of like protocols built around, well, okay, let's take it at a certain time of day. Maybe I want to be in the same position in terms of my posture. And, there's a lot of stuff you can do there that's very helpful. Or when I'm sleeping, there's valuable data there too.
Yeah.
But the truth is, especially when you're thinking about mental health, like a lot of that stuff happening when you're awake, right? It's
right.
And it's particularly if you're trying to self-regulate and use biofeedback. So we focus on the day, and, if you are measuring HRV at a high quality, with high accuracy, you can see those micro fluctuations, and you can actually use those as triggers to practice at the moments you need it throughout the day.
Great.
And that's been our approach.
Very cool. So, as you look as, somebody who's strongly in the market, obviously, whereas we talk, there's a mental health crisis going on in the country, if not the world right now. Like heart rate variability, I hope, is a tool that people will discover devices like yours, to supplement. And we're starting to hit a scarcity of mental health resources because the demand is really increasing. What do you see? Because we're also in the technology world, AI is staring us in the face. A lot of other big developments with the deep learning models and all those sort of things as well. Like, as you look into the future, both with your device and maybe as the field as a whole, if you were to think about the next 10, 15 years, now that probably quadruple, if not 10x times, people at least know about heart rate variability, and that's only going to increase over time. Where do you think all this, if you look into the future, where are we going with these biometrics, AI, all the other things that we're getting access to now?
I'm an optimist, and so I love dreaming about a better world and how we can make that happen. So, I try to look on the bright side of a lot of these technologies because they can be very powerful tools.
Yeah.
We have, for example, a clinic that we've launched in California now, where we're actually working with psychiatrists and clinical psychologists and coaches, along with the Lief, getting people's insurance to cover some of this stuff. And we're expanding now to other states. And that, I think, is a model that could be replicated for a lot more people, because the truth is there's not going to be enough, even if we're just talking about mental health, and HRV has effects, right, on physical health too. So there's a variety of places it can couple. Let's just talk about mental health, right? Most expensive medical condition in the country at this point, hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Millions and tens of millions of people that can't get treatment, they're not going to get treatment the traditional way. There's just not enough therapists. There's not enough psychiatrists. There's not enough psychologists to ever meet the scale of the problem. And that is a tragedy, because we're losing our human potential. Yeah. When we don't help people heal and get tools that they need at the moments that they need it, and just allow these problems to fester over time. It's just, we know where that road ends.
Yes.
So the way that I see these tools helping, I think, in the future is how can you leverage the strength of technology, which is that you need fewer people, So, okay, but we don't have enough therapists to reach everyone. Is it possible that some of these AI tools over time, with a lot of training, could actually become good enough to be helpful to people? Yeah. I think that's an open question, but my guess is yes. And when you talk about HRV biofeedback, is this a modality that can be applied and scaled to more people? I think also the answer there is probably so. There's good evidence now with meta-analyses that this is efficacious just as much as CBT or pharmaceuticals, in some cases more so. So I think what we have to do is really, because healthcare in particular is such a top-down thing, we have to convince the people that are already, calling the shots that, look, you've got a problem here. This is a potential solution.
Yeah.
There's good data. You got to try it. And just over time, inevitably, if it does work for people and it is helpful, then, you'll see that adoption. So that's my hope and my dream that, eventually that 15-year-old kid who's going through mental health struggles that I was, however many years ago at this point, that they have options that are available to them that they can access right away, and that change their life, hopefully.
Love it. So kind of a final question too, unless I come up with 6 more questions, which is what I typically do. But to kind of wrap us up here, one of the things I'm interested in from learning about your work is, I see heart rate variability and the potential, especially if we're tracking it on a daily basis, 3-minute readings versus 24 versus, all kinds of different, whether you get a 3-minute, 5-minute reading at night while you sleep, whatever sort of the model you do. I really believe we're creating I strongly believe that HRV should be considered a vital sign. I get, now that I know about biometrics, this, that, and the other, I don't know really the benefit of listening to my heart for a few seconds. What are you really measuring? My blood pressure? Are you measuring my blood pressure, or how stressed out I am from the commute into the clinic today? And so, where I really get excited about work like yours is, I think, while this may scare some people, it excites me that things are tracking your body, your biometrics 24/7 could give us a range of information on people's health that we haven't come close to having. So we could potentially improve diagnostic accuracy, treatment adherence, if they track side effects before they manifest into really negative outcomes. So I wonder, as you're you're working and you got this technology in the market, that vital sign idea, have you seen any interest from like the medical arena on the potential of your work?
I think early interest perhaps, but yeah. So like, for example, I think there's been some large healthcare organizations that have had contests for, new tools for anxiety and depression, things like that. And we've won some of those. But those are just one-offs. We're talking about the budget of these big companies. A little prize like that is it's a rounding error, right? They're nibbling, I think, at understanding, could this be helpful or not? And part of that maybe is the approach that some larger companies have, where they're really very focused on decreasing costs, and they maybe care a little bit less actually about health over time. Like some insurance. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect is like, it really touched me what you just said, to be very frank with you, because in my mind, I think HRV is a diagnostic indicator for mental health and for a variety of other conditions as well, is so strong and could really save people a lot of heartache and a lot of issues with their health down the line. And so, we've looked a little bit at using tools like AI to parse apart the signals that are embedded even within the HRV signal. There are things in there that, people, I think over time we'll start to learn more and more about, and those tools can be given to patients, to users, and empower them to make decisions, right? One of the big things with mental health that drives me crazy is, there's been this feeling for a long time in the past, and this is changing now, but that mental health is all in your head. And, even the way that it's measured now with these assessments like GAD-7s and PHQ-9s, those are basically quizzes. Those are like questionnaires.
You're right.
You're asking people to self-report, and that's such an inherently biased thing to do. It's tough, and particularly for somebody who, doesn't maybe have, the context to know, well, what should I be feeling? How normal is this or not? there's a gap. And I think if you're able to create, and I'll just put a, just to put a pin in it, I think if you are in the future able to create tools that act as diagnostics, for example, for mental health, I think that you'll end up saving lives over time, because what you'll do is you'll provide an early warning system and you'll provide data that helps people say, look, this is not something that's just all in my head, quote unquote.
Yeah.
This is a real medical problem. And here is the data. And I can see myself getting better and I can see myself getting worse.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is, I think, enough that it could actually shift people's health outcomes over time, make them live happier and healthier lives. And that's what we're here for. That's what it's all about. So it's really important.
Anything I say after that is going to diminish the value of this podcast. So I loved it. So I would we'll obviously put information, links in the show notes, but would just love to, if people are interested in your work, a little bit about, where they might find some of that information. Like I said, we'll also put the more detailed ones in the show notes.
Yeah. Feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to talk. We're online at getlief.com, and would welcome any questions people have.
Well, thank you so much. It was so great to meet you. I love this conversation. I just want to keep the door open as you find out more and more, learn more and more with this. I'd love to be a fellow traveler on this podcast with us. So I love the work you're doing. I love your focus. It's why I'm on this journey as well. So one of the fun parts about doing this podcast is meeting innovators like you that are trying to merge technology with a social mission that you have for people's mental health as well. So I just want to thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing as well.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody can find show notes, everything else at optimalhrv.com. And we'll see you all again next week. Thank you, my friend, for joining us.
Take care. Appreciate it.